Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are extremely excited to welcome you all. Hope that you are having a wonderful day so far. Here in London, we have a November weather in June, unfortunately. Besides the weather, we are super excited to talk about how to create a continuous feedback environment as a part of new generation people management. Giving instant and continuous feedback is one of the most important pillars of future of work, and it is highly important for high performance. However, what is more important than this is how to make feedback culture human and inclusive for everyone. Because if your feedback culture is not personal or not people-centric, development or not even development focused with competencies, there is no way to make it effective and reach a high-performing culture. Before we kick off, actually, I would like to share a bit of background of our speaker, Chadi Moussa. Chadi is a senior business psychologist at PeopleWise, and he has been in various HR and talent roles over 12 years. He was previously Global Head of People Development at BSI and HR Director of Wealmoor. He is a Chartered Fellow of CIPD and one of the most passionate HR people I know. And welcome, Chadi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
We see instant feedback in many parts of our lives. From social media, when we join Instagram, or even when we finish a call with a customer support team, we are always being asked to give a feedback at that particular moment. But when it comes to the people management, instant feedback is not still there yet. You have been working in various projects and many teams, many companies, Chadi. And I would like to start with defining the feedback culture with you. What is it for you and why is it important?
Yeah, so I think for me, feedback culture really means that you work in an organization or ecosystem where giving feedback, whatever that looks like, is done in the right way, consistently, and done by everyone. Now, the reason it's important is because we know feedback is a critical tool for development. It is a critical tool for recognition, and it's a critical tool for performance. So you can't expect to have a high-performing organization where there is a lack of continuous, ongoing feedback. And in those environments, what you typically find is that people feel recognized. They feel that their work is connected to the goals of their team and the organization. And that's motivating and engaging. And we know that although engagement doesn't predict business performance, it's related. And where you have high levels of engagement and enablement, we know that those companies usually outperform their competitors. They have higher customer satisfaction, they have higher retention, and higher profitability. Now, which organization would not want those things?
Exactly. You have touched to many very, very important differentiators. And however, there is a very shocking statistics. Based on a global research, 90% of employees don't think that they are getting enough feedback from their managers. And when we think of the workplace, we need to be guided to improve our competencies all the time. And many experts are defining giving feedback as mirroring. And it's very important to find ourselves, and it's in a way of awakening for us, for every individual as well. So as a human being, we always seek feedback. And as a psychologist, I would like to ask to you, like, if you have seen any change during COVID times when we were working from home. We are still working from home. And how did employee expectations in a way change during this time for feedback, for receiving feedback or sharing feedback?
Yes, that's a great question. I think what we've seen over the last 16 months is people having to adapt to doing things differently and doing them differently overnight. So, for example, if you met with your direct reports face to face and you would have a conversation, whether that was around tasks, performance, and you were used to delivering feedback in person, maybe you also observe that those people in real life. Then going on to I guess giving feedback in a different medium, so over video conferencing. Well, what are the differences? You could argue that people instantly think it is more formal because you're over the camera. Your interactions might not be the same. You might just meet to discuss certain meetings. So for me, I think what one thing that I've seen, certainly in kind of like the better organizations, is they have still made time to, I guess, have developmental performance conversations, whatever the medium, whether that's over video conferencing. They haven't just stopped because people are no longer physically sat together. Because remember, work is something you do. It's not somewhere you go for many people. And I think the other thing that I've noticed is that people have, or organizations who have maybe the systems and processes and also technology to really enable a feedback culture. Well, they've still been able to use that technology because they've still been able to collaborate in the same way. They've still been able to give feedback, recognize people's achievements. By utilizing the technology. So, for example, if they recognize a colleague has done something well, they will post on a forum, or they will use whatever recognition scheme they have so other people can see that. And as you know, people often do what they see their managers and other people doing. So the more often people see recognition, constructive feedback being given, the more likely they are to do that.
Yeah, very important. As you mentioned, the interaction is not the same before COVID. We are sitting in our desk all day and we are in the Zoom calls all the time. However, it's very much work related and we are missing kind of human interaction a bit. When we had the chance to talk with our colleagues in a coffee chat, maybe in the kitchen of the office or something. And as you rightly said, like if other people, other colleagues also seeing that there is a recognition culture, it's very more likely to adopt and start that, rainbow, I would say, to roll and to have an inclusive feedback culture afterwards.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, please.
And I was going to say, and remember that the thing about feedback that people often forget is it's two-way. So if you are talking about feedback cultures, if that is really ingrained in the culture of the organizations, they may have, for example, a built-in upward feedback tool. So at certain periods, employees would give and receive feedback to the line manager, colleagues, peers, and so on. After delivering a project, if it was built into culture, there may be a system where feedback went out to all the stakeholders involved, and then they may be outside of the organization, they may be inside of the organization. But the point is, pandemic or no pandemic, they have the culture supported by the systems, processes, and resources to maintain that continuous and ongoing feedback. And that's very important.
Yeah, definitely. Having some feedback tools that allow this culture is very, very critical, especially in remote working, because now we are seeking some tools to be able to connect with our colleagues and our working environment. So it leads to my next question, actually. Do you have or do you suggest any methodology to start building this feedback culture we just talked about, to spreading via sharing more, recognizing more? But have you seen any examples, real life examples, maybe on the projects that you worked for? Maybe if you can share here with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, if I'm going to give you some psychological tips and tricks, so for me, I would really recommend that organizations start by setting the expectation around feedback, that they expect feedback to be a daily ongoing process and two-way feedback. So that's the first thing. Make it really, really clear. The second thing is around getting senior leaders to role model and sponsor these types of behaviors, because people will do what they see other people doing far more than they're likely to do what they've been taught on a training program. So if it's sponsored and led by the top and role models, then you will see employees more likely to adopt those behaviors. And I guess it's around explaining to people, why should you start giving and receiving more feedback? And so therefore it's about the what's in it for them, what are the benefits to them of giving and receiving feedback. And it's developmental, it's around their performance, it's around becoming better colleagues, it's around creating a better culture. And if you can really explain to someone and show them the benefits of that, then I think it's going to encourage them to repeat those behaviors. And then the other thing I would say is that there are three reasons that people don't give or ask for feedback. One, sometimes they want to avoid the conflict. Two, they may think it's awkward. But the third reason is people sometimes just don't know how to do it properly. So therefore, I think develop people. And it's not just a one-off initiative around how you give feedback, a sheep dip. Make sure there's resources available, online learning, and so that people can access that anytime and maybe use it in a just-in-time, learning. So we know that you shouldn't just give people feedback once a year or twice a year in performance reviews. You should make it a daily thing, and maybe if you have monthly meetings or weekly check-ins with your staff, build it into the cadence so that it becomes a habit for you. And then finally, I think, as I said, really make sure that the business or the organization has the systems, processes, and tools that really encourage a feedback culture. So, for example, 360s, upward feedback surveys. That way, again, you're just making it a normal day-to-day activity, that people will get used to. And so from that point of view, that would be my biggest tips for creating a feedback culture.
That's great tips, actually. You mentioned about two-way feedback, getting senior leaders to be seen as role models, and understanding why they are doing this, the reason behind why they are initiating that feedback culture, why your company would like to have an engaging peer-to-peer engagement, and this would be continuous, and why it really matters. Maybe highlighting the company culture there would be very, very important, and align these feedbacks, especially with the mission or the values of the company, is very essential. Yes, definitely. And I would like to add something from Sorvi as well, as a people expert. At Sorvi, we are making this instant feedback. I think for us, there are two essential pillars. One is, are you going to make this instant feedback fun? Is it easy enough? And is it really instant enough that people will adopt it? Because if you would like to spread it to the whole community, all employees, then they need to have a motivation to do that. So it needs to be a bit informal, which also underlines being fun, but also very easy, that it won't take time. What we did actually is, when we launched our instant feedback tool very recently, we asked to companies first to decide on their dominant competencies based on their values and mission. And when they decide, they also come up with kind of emojis and badges that they can integrate to their system inside the feedback tools. And then because it's fun and they're seeing that and they're also understanding why these competencies matter for the company culture, we naturally saw an engagement peer-to-peer, but also from managers to employees or employees towards the managers. So yeah, I think it's very, very essential to understand why and make it fun and make it two-way as well, not only one way, but two-way feedback. It leads to my next question. At that point, I would like to ask, you mentioned about some feedback tools, but how do you see the stance of technology when we are shifting towards a hybrid model?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think you touched on it there. It's about making it as easy and natural and normal for people to give and receive feedback as possible. And what do we leverage to get on and be active in our day-to-day lives? We use technology. So for me, if you can really embed technology and help people understand that it can be a very, very useful tool, and also a reminder, because sometimes life gets in the way, we get really, really busy, and while we're trying to survive and thrive in this complex and increasingly complex business environment, then having prompts and reminders that will help you elicit and also give feedback to other people, it's going to be incredibly useful. And that's what I mean. Build it into your business rhythm. And so if you can have prompts to, for example, after each project or on a regular cadence, so weekly, monthly, whereby you're asking employees, colleagues to give, customers, clients to give feedback on each other, then I think that's where technology becomes really, really useful. And you have to remember, the world of HR is also changing, and the way we look at things like performance management. So performance management previously, it used to be about one data point, your line manager. But we know now the way that organizations and teams work, virtual teams, people working in a hybrid model, you want to get feedback from multiple data points to really inform an accurate picture of how an individual or team or division or organization are performing. And so for me, technology plays a really, really critical part in that. And it's going nowhere. In fact, it's only going to grow. So I would really encourage organizations to really look at how they can utilize technology, also to drive better data, because if you collect all of this feedback together, what you start to get is very, very rich data on how your organization is performing. And then you can take that data and you can start to make better decisions that are going to make the organization more effective.
Yeah, definitely. I was about to come to this part actually to understand the feedback analytics and how we can use these results into other people processes or talent processes that we have. But just before that, I would like to explore the feedback culture and how to set up clearly a bit more. So you said about reminders, setting reminders, and building this feedback culture aligned with the business rhythm. I think it's super important, especially in recognizing important events or milestones of the company. We need to be sure that feedback is there. However, I think we can even make it more instant and even more continuous without the need of having a publishment or a news from the company. Maybe employees can also be able to share and recognize peer-to-peer without the need of recognizing an event. I think this would be the very crucial step to make it super sustainable. Yes, definitely to start with, I think it's important to start with small steps, maybe with some reminders, recognizing the business milestones, but after that it will go naturally. And I would like to also ask about the psychology of giving and receiving feedback. And when we think about the UK and especially London, we see that it's extremely cosmopolitan cohort. It's not only the citizens, but also the working cultures that as well. We are all coming from different backgrounds and different cultures, and how to enable the feedback culture for everyone who's coming from different backgrounds. Do you have some tactics to suggest to make it engaging and sustainable for everybody?
Yeah, so I think whichever culture that you come from, feedback is going to be important. Now, there are going to be nuances, but for me, I think it is about being clear as to the value of feedback and the intention of feedback. And by that I mean organizations should really try and build a culture where good work is recognized, it's recognized fairly and consistently, and where constructive feedback is given also consistently, but more importantly, it's given in the right way. So if employees feel they work in an environment that is psychologically safe, where they feel okay to make mistakes and to admit to those mistakes, but they also know that they work in an environment where the stuff that they do well is also recognized, you're then creating the right environment. And the thing about feedback is it needs to be authentic. It needs to be objective and evidence-based. So when you're giving someone feedback, you should very much focus on what they did and the impact of that, and then make it very, very clear, how that made you feel, and why that's important to you. The other thing about feedback is it needs to be timely. There may be situations where that feedback needs to be instant. You may be midway through a presentation or project, and actually it's very, very important that feedback is delivered quickly. However, there may be other times when it's better to wait for the right opportunity. Do you give that person the feedback in public? Do you do it in private? And then really focusing on the delivery of the message, so that it is not about the person, but it is about the action. And I think for me, that's very, very important, because when feedback is given, fairly, objectively, authentically, and in a timely way, people are far more likely to react to it in a positive way, and also see it as helpful. And I think when some of those components are missing, that is when people can become fearful or anxious about giving and receiving feedback.
Yeah, definitely. I was about to ask a question regarding on that, actually, because when we say about feedback culture, we are aiming a positive vibes only atmosphere. However, it's very difficult at start maybe to build it, because it may cause a bad reaction, or we can come up it enable some scandals. So the management side will be very, very important. And I would like to ask if you had some real life examples, maybe how they prevented some bad behaviors, or probably you are seeing a lot of requests from companies regarding on that. How do you prevent, or how do you challenge it? There should be some challenges, and how do you make it not harmful for the company culture itself?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. Number one, I would say avoid passive management or colleague behavior, and by that I mean employees should not hear feedback only when something goes very, very wrong, or when something goes very, very well. They should hear feedback all the time, so it is normal and it is useful. The other thing that I would say, and this goes for everyone, we are sometimes aware of our strengths. We are sometimes aware of our weaknesses, but we'll also have blind spots, so both strengths and weaknesses. And for me, where I've seen feedback be incredibly helpful is around employee development, management development, leadership development, because there'll be situations where you will have a high performing employee who may demonstrate certain behaviors that are useful and some that are unuseful, but they'll be unaware. And it's only been through the feedback process that they've been able to really then recognize and either do more of those behaviors or alter their behavior. And I think the other part about it is that depending on the relationship that you have with somebody, that's going to affect the kind of feedback that you receive. So it's useful to go to multiple sources. And by that, I mean, you could go peer-to-peer, you could go to colleagues, you could go to senior peers, you can go to clients, you can go to different stakeholders. Because if you aggregate all of that rich feedback together, that gives you a really, really vivid picture of how you're seen by others. And I find that if you have multiple sources informing you, that's a far more powerful method to help people adopt, change, or improve their behaviours. So I think those things, making sure that people seek feedback and give feedback regularly, so avoiding passive. I think that they go to multiple sources are very useful ways to try and make feedback just generally a positive but useful experience for employees.
Yeah, very true. And when you said about passive management, we at Solvit sometimes from our potential clients, we are hearing that they would like to include like negative feedbacks or like dislike, unliking, but these kind of stuff may harm the company culture. And we always suggest maybe if there is somewhere that it can be developed, then they can use like it could be better, for example, instead of dislike. And definitely, I hear the thing that you said about going to multiple resources. And once you go or check with multiple resources, you get a better picture, a clearer picture. Actually, I had one question related to having the multiple resources on analyzing the feedback data. We talked a lot about the importance of instant feedback. On the other hand, we have traditional tools that we are using for 360-degree feedback and employee engagement surveys, which are done once or twice a year. And in your idea and in your experience, what should be the right mix in the people management?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think, look, it's great that organizations collect feedback at different levels. But the most important thing about feedback is that you do something with it. Because the risks of asking for feedback and then not taking that feedback on board and communicating clear action plans is that it will undermine the very culture of giving feedback, because people just will feel that there's no point because I'm not being listened to. And if I take it we zoom one step out, there's a wider trend within HR and talent at the moment and business, which is about conscientious and purposeful led organization. And that is about not just doing good stuff for the environment, but about being a listening organization, really tapping into the wants and needs of all employees. And this is where the diversity point comes in. What is diversity inclusion? It's about making sure that everyone has a seat at the table, that everyone has a voice at the table, but most importantly, that voice is heard. So whether you do an employee engagement survey once a year, twice a year, or you do it every week, it's just critical that something practical and useful happens with that feedback. and that whatever you do and the impact of that is then communicated back, because that will encourage people to give and receive feedback more. And that's what we want to do, going back to creating that culture of continuous feedback.
Yeah, definitely true. Communicating it back is super important, because then they understand the importance of it and adopting that culture and sharing this feedback with other colleagues as well. And we touched a bit on the analyzing the feedback results. And I know that you are into people analytics. We all know that we can't manage something that we can't measure. So what would be your suggestions to HR professionals to track feedback results, how they can do it?
Yeah, so look, I think it's a really great point. You know, you can't improve what isn't being measured. And so for me, I think, you know, put whatever system and process in place that allows you to track progress, because you can use that data to inform the feedback and to measure the effectiveness of whatever initiative that you put in place. I think for me, there are some great technological solutions and platforms like the one that you have. And it's not just about doing it at an individual level, at a team level. It's about looking at that data as a whole, because what you can then start to do is you can start to inform some organizational development. And it may be so, for example, through the feedback mechanism, you may recognize that there are certain competencies that are very important for your organization that really need to be developed within a certain population or even across the organization. You can then use that data to inform how you then apportion resources, time, effort, KPIs, which, as you can imagine, especially in this environment, are going to be quite precious. So it can be very useful. And so for me, I think, you know, utilizing technology and data in a really clever way, whereby that analysis, those stories can inform practically what organizations can do next to become more effective.
Yeah, definitely. As a feedback as well, like at SOWI, we are also allowing the management to see all the instant feedback results. It's also feedback to them, to the managers, because at the end of the day, they can see who is better in certain competencies, or who has the ability to improve himself or herself. This leads to your answer, which is about organizational development as a whole, because you are touching personally, you are seeing the results personally, of course, related to if it's not anonymous. And you can create a personalized career development. But by touching personally, you're reaching a whole organization development as a final result.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big benefit.
It's a very hot topic, very exciting topic for us. And I would like to hear more, maybe if you have some examples to share from real life or from the projects that you have, would be great. Also, I would like to remind to our attendees, if you have any questions, please feel free to comment. We will be answering in a moment. Yeah, Chadi, if maybe if you have any examples.
Certainly, yeah. So I worked for a professional services company, and there was some sort of feedback culture. However, that feedback culture was very much one way, whereby if you were the manager, you would give the employee feedback on their performance. However, from the engagement survey, the data we're receiving is that people felt they weren't being managed and led in the right way, or in the way that they appreciated. So how do you solve that problem? And one part of it was around saying, okay, well, what can we do systematically to address this issue? So as part of the performance management process, once every quarter, employees would have the opportunity to give their managers feedback on how they were managing them, but against the reference point of the management leadership competency framework that organization had. Now, what that did is that gave employees a regular, formal and important outlet to start creating a two-way feedback culture. And what we soon found in a very, very short space of time is that engagement scores were rising, because it's not that managers wanted to necessarily be bad managers or manage in a way that was disengaging people, but there just wasn't the opportunity, and people didn't feel comfortable giving their manager feedback. So by putting it as a process within a system and a structure, what you soon start to see is that people start doing it more regularly. And as the months went on, you'll see the take up, because obviously it's voluntary, can't necessarily mandate it. And as a result, you saw a huge difference in the following year's engagement survey results, especially around the questions of how effectively people are being managed and led. And I think what's important to add there is you can't just give people the systems, processes, and tools. You've also got to give them the training and development so they know how to give feedback in the right way. And I guess in a true modern organizational spirit, some of this was done by through blended learning. So in fact, which is a very cost-efficient, effective way to do it. So e-learning, online virtual courses, workbooks, guides, videos, and learning content that people could access 24/7 at a time that suited them. And the final thing to say is it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think the evidence shows us, and certainly my experience shows us, that it's something that you can embed in an organization relatively quickly.
It's a very good example. Definitely, I'm hearing that it needs to be two-way, and we need to blend with our learnings, with all our processes of a company. We have two very nice questions. The first question is from Ayşegül Yetkin. She has a great question here. She's asking, we are more comfortable giving feedback to our employees, but we cannot give feedback to our manager with the same ease. At this point, what should we pay attention to?
So thank you for the question, Ayşegül. I think that feeling is common amongst many employees, and certainly depending on the organizational culture, it may not be the norm to give your manager feedback. However, if you think about what we spoke about earlier, if you come at it with the right approach, so that it is timely, so that you focus on specific behaviors and the impact of those behaviors. Because remember, when you tell somebody how something made you feel, they can't really argue that. You can dispute facts and figures, but you can't really dispute how something made you feel. So I think taking that approach to feedback and doing it in the right way, I think the first time is always going to be difficult. However, I think the more you do it, and the more I think people get used to it, then I think the more normal it will become. But also, I think remember, feedback isn't just constructive. If you only ever go to somebody when you've got something constructive to say, then they might become a bit wary. But think about feedback's opportunity to let them know when they've done something well, because we know feedback can be motivating for people. Feedback can encourage people to demonstrate behaviors, again. So I would say look at giving feedback in the right way. Make sure it's regular. Make sure it's balanced. Ideally, 3 times more positive than it is constructive. And then I would finally say, focus on building a strong relationship with your manager, because if there is that trust and that communication there, giving feedback will be much easier. I hope that's helpful.
It's a great answer too. We have actually a lot of questions regarding on negative feedback or how to communicate our feedback with our managers if they are lacking this feedback culture. So the second question is from Özlem. She's asking about the psychology of getting feedback, receiving feedback. How shall we stay motivated when we receive a negative feedback?
Yeah, so I think it's all about mindset, and from a psychological point of view, it's about habits. Receiving negative feedback may then it is a trigger, and that trigger will automatically make you feel defensive. It can make you feel sad. It can make you frustrated. It can make you feel angry, and then you will behave in a certain way. I would say, to break that habit, be curious about what you do when you hear constructive feedback. How do you react? Do you react angrily? Well, in which case, what can you replace that with? What can you replace that with? Can you then view it as an opportunity to improve and develop? Can you ask more questions? Can you investigate? Can you find out? Because if you see it as an opportunity for development and an opportunity for growth, then I think that can be a really, really positive thing. And also remember, if someone's giving you the feedback, it may have taken a lot for that person to give you that feedback. They might have thought it was stressful. It may have taken them a lot of courage. So what you can do is, I think, thank them. But also, if you're then going to adopt the feedback and you're going to try and change your behavior, you can absolutely feel free to go back to that person at a certain point in time and ask them how you're progressing. So for me, I think flip it on its head. Look at it as a development opportunity and an opportunity for you to grow, because whichever role you have in whichever organization, and what we typically find is the more senior, the more complex the role, the more feedback that you will receive. So if you can get yourself acquainted with receiving feedback, then you're more likely to handle it in a positive way.
Yeah, definitely amazing answer. Being curious about the negative feedback, why they did that, and understanding the underlying behind it. Maybe there is a potential, there is an opportunity to grow. Maybe it's about one of your lacking skills, lacking competencies. Understanding it and asking for the progress after a while is very critical, not to take it personally, because I think it's very easy to take it personally, or understanding it's not a negative comment as well, if it's something related to our competencies at work. But maybe taking a moment, thinking twice, and asking for investigating, as you said, why you gave this, why not that, etc. Maybe with examples, asking for examples to your managers is going to be very beneficial.
Absolutely.
We have another question from Selma. She's asking, if we don't have any feedback culture in our company, especially managers, as I said, there are a lot of questions with managers, what type of practical tactics do you suggest to start to build this culture? Because it needs to be, I think, top down and bottom up at the same time. But if the top management is lacking this, how can we initiate this change from bottom?
Yeah, it's a great question, Selma, and I think for me it goes back to the expectations, being clear about the expectations, but also what are the benefits? What are the real life benefits for managers and leaders of giving and receiving feedback? And we know there's lots of evidence. There's a very, very strong business case for giving and receiving feedback. And you can use lots of stats and data. But of course, the other technique for convincing and influencing people is about storytelling. Can you tell the story of how similar organizations or competitors in your field or organizations that those leaders admire have really utilized feedback and development and recognition to improve engagement, improve performance? Because then people will start to understand some of the potential benefits. The other thing, Selma, which I think is really, really important, is being really careful not to assume that actually everyone is comfortable or they know how to give and receive feedback. They know when to give and receive feedback, and that also they know what to do with it. So I think if you put the development in place, which will take away the barriers to people feeling comfortable to giving and receiving feedback, I think you start on that journey. And remember, culture is about what people do day in and day out. So the more people you can encourage to start doing that, the more likely you are to gain momentum, and the more likely it is to form an organizational habit. But you're absolutely right. It must start at the top. So who can you think of? Which leaders in your organization, which leadership, how can you get them to really start role modeling those behaviors and to really start giving and receiving feedback themselves? Because what you'll find is once you see the leadership team start doing it, others usually quickly follow.
Yes, maybe it reminded me a video that I watched about early adopters, maybe figuring out in the leadership positions who could be the early adopters, and giving the need or comparing the results from other competitors, other players in the sector. That can be admirable, and this could initiate the first start.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And we have one final question from Zainab. She's asking, as a manager, if I have a negative feedback to share, and I know that I don't want to break the moral motivation of my employees, how can I share my feedback, which has a negative underlying?
Yeah, I think, Zainab, that's a really great question. One technique which I find particularly useful is to state the intention of your feedback. So if you've observed something that you feel is unhelpful or unproductive, be honest with the employee and say, I observed some feedback which I really want to give you because I want you to be successful, I want you to be effective, and I want you to develop. And then focus on the specific behavior that you observed and what the impact of that behavior, was. And then ask the employee, how did they see it? What did they recognize? How did they think it went? Because more often than not, they may themselves recognize that they did something wrong, or it didn't quite go to plan. But then I would say, state your expectation. So what would you have expected that person to do in that situation? Because I think if it's framed in the right way, and it's going to be developmental, and it's done with good intentions, then I find that people often will take it better, but also they'll welcome it because they see it as being in their interests as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chadi, to answer all the questions. Actually, I think we touched so many important points about creating feedback culture and the psychology behind it. We talked about sharing the intention of this feedback that needs to be fair and consistent to make it more sustainable, that we need a psychologically safe place first to initiate this process, of course, and maybe to figuring out in the management as well, who could be our role model, and comparing with other best practices in the sector. And more importantly, all the feedback, I think, the difference between the 360 ones or one yearly done employee engagement surveys is to make the feedback timely, because it's mostly backward. It looks to backward analysis. However, making the feedback instant allows a continuous growth. I think we learned a lot today. I hope our attendees also enjoyed the talk. I was very, very happy to hear your ideas, your examples, and the tactics that you shared with us. And yes, thank you so much for joining us all, and hoping to have amazing company cultures that we can easily share feedback and receive feedback for better days, for a better future of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.